The rain had been falling without pause since midnight, washing the city in a dull gray silence. Streetlights flickered against wet asphalt, and the narrow road beside the abandoned railway tracks looked more like a shallow river than a path. At dawn, when most people were still asleep, a lone jogger followed his usual route, earbuds in, hood pulled tight around his face. He had run this path hundreds of times before. It was quiet, forgotten by the city, and that was why he liked it. At first, he noticed nothing unusual. The rain softened every sound, turning footsteps into whispers. Then he saw something dark ahead, lying near the tracks where weeds grew thick and wild. From a distance, it looked like a discarded jacket or a pile of trash washed there by the storm. He slowed down, slightly annoyed, thinking someone had dumped their mess again. As he got closer, the shape became clearer. The fabric was too neat, too carefully placed. Then he saw a hand. It was pale, almost white, resting palm up in the mud. The fingers were relaxed, not clenched, not stiff. For a moment, the jogger stood frozen, unable to breathe. His mind searched for a simple explanation, something that would allow him to turn around and forget what he was seeing. But there was no mistake. A man was lying there, motionless, rain collecting on his face as if the sky itself was trying to wash him away. The jogger stepped back, his heart pounding so loudly he thought it might drown out the rain. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and dialed emergency services. His voice cracked as he explained where he was and what he had found. He stayed on the line until the operator told him help was on the way. Within minutes, flashing blue and red lights cut through the darkness. Police cars lined the narrow road, their tires sinking slightly into the wet ground. Officers moved carefully, marking off the area with tape while the rain continued to fall. Paramedics checked for signs of life, but it was clear there was none. The man had been dead for hours. The body belonged to a male, estimated to be in his mid-30s. He was dressed neatly in dark trousers, a buttoned shirt, and a long coat that was now soaked through. Despite lying in mud and rain, his clothes were clean, almost too clean for someone who had died outdoors. There were no visible tears, no signs of a struggle around him. The ground showed no drag marks, no footprints nearby except for the joggers. As officers searched the body, confusion began to spread among them. The man carried nothing. No wallet, no phone, no keys. His pockets were empty. Even more unusual, the labels on his clothes had been carefully removed. Not torn out roughly, but cut cleanly, as if someone had taken time to erase every clue that might point to where the clothes came from. An officer checked the man's hands, expecting to see dirt under his nails or signs of defense. Instead, his nails were clean and trimmed. His skin showed no bruises, no cuts. His face was calm, almost peaceful, with closed eyes and relaxed features. It did not look like the face of someone who had died in Faye. The rain made it difficult to collect evidence, but forensic teams worked under portable lights, photographing every angle. The body was carefully placed into a black bag and taken away, leaving behind a patch of disturbed mud that slowly filled with water. By the time the sun rose, the story had already reached the local police station. A body found near the tracks. No identification. No witnesses. It sounded simple at first, just another tragic death in a city full of them. But as detectives reviewed the initial reports, it became clear that this case was different. At the morgue, the examination began immediately. The medical examiner noted that the man was physically healthy. No signs of long-term illness. No scars that could easily explain who he was. Then came the first real surprise. Toxicology tests revealed traces of a rare chemical poison in his system. It was odorless, colorless, and fast-acting. Not something that could be found in everyday products. There were no injection marks on his skin. No damage to his throat. No pills in his stomach. The poison had been delivered in a way that left almost no trace. Whoever administered it had knowledge and precision. This was not an accident, and it was not random violence. The cause of death was ruled a homicide. Detectives gathered in a small room, studying the photos laid out before them. The man's face was clear, well-defined, and easy to recognize. Someone, somewhere, should have been missing him. A family member. A friend. a co-worker. Yet no missing person reports matched his description. His fingerprints were scanned and sent through national databases. The results came back empty. No criminal record. No employment record. No immigration record. It was as if the man had never existed. The case was officially labeled John Doe 47, a number chosen without meaning, simply the next in line. But even as the name was written down, everyone in the room felt uneasy. This John Doe was not like the others. Most unidentified bodies eventually led to answers. A runaway. A tourist. Someone living on the edge of society. This man did not fit any of those stories. Outside the station, reporters began to gather. A body with no identity always caught public attention. Photos were released to the media, hoping someone would recognize him. The image showed a man with sharp features, dark hair neatly cut, and a serious expression that hinted at intelligence. He looked like someone you might pass on the street every day and never notice twice. As hours passed, calls came in. People claiming he looked like a co-worker, a neighbor, a distant relative. Each lead was checked. Each one led nowhere. The man was not who anyone thought he was. By nightfall, detectives returned to the scene. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still wet. Standing near the tracks, one detective noticed how carefully the body had been placed. It was not thrown there. It was laid down. Almost respectfully. That detail changed everything. This was not just a murder. It was a message. Someone wanted this body to be found. But they did not want the man to be known. And as the city went to sleep that night, unaware of the mystery that had quietly arrived, one question haunted everyone involved in the case. Who was the man with no name? And why had someone worked so hard to make sure he died without one? When the second week passed without a single confirmed lead, the case began to feel unreal, even to the detectives working it every day. The man on the metal table in the morgue had a face, fingerprints, blood, bones, and a clear cause of death, yet he had no past. It was as if his life had started only moments before he died. Detective Harris stood quietly during the second full autopsy review, watching the medical examiner move with slow precision. Every inch of the body was examined again, this time not just to find how the man died, but to understand who he had been. Height, weight, muscle tone, skin condition, all pointed to someone who lived carefully. He was not homeless. He was not struggling. He took care of himself. That made the absence of identity even more disturbing. The medical examiner pointed out something that had been missed the first time. Beneath the left ribcage was a thin surgical scar. It was old, faded, and perfectly healed. Not the kind of scar left by emergency surgery or a street clinic. This was done in a professional operating room by a skilled surgeon. Harris immediately ordered hospital records to be checked, not just locally, but across the country. Days later, the results came back. No matches. Hospitals had no record of the man's fingerprints, dental scans, or facial features. Even private clinics came up empty. It was as if the surgery had never happened, or had happened somewhere far beyond their reach. Another possibility slowly crept into the room, unspoken at first, but heavy in everyone's thoughts. The records might have been erased. Meanwhile, the toxicology report continued to raise alarms. The poison found in the man's system was extremely rare. It was used mainly in high-level research labs and was tightly controlled. Access required clearance, documentation, and strict tracking. This was not something a normal criminal could obtain. Detectives contacted every facility authorized to handle the chemical. Some cooperated fully. Others delayed, asking questions, requesting paperwork, or claiming privacy rules. That resistance only deepened suspicion. Someone, somewhere, was nervous. As the investigation widened, the absence of everyday details became more troubling. No digital footprint existed. No social media. No phone records. No online accounts. Financial databases showed nothing. No bank accounts. No credit cards. No loans. Even people who tried to stay hidden left traces in the modern world. This man had left none. The media labeled him the man with no past, and the story spread quickly. News channels replayed his photo every hour. Social media filled with theories. Some claimed he was a spy. Others believed he was part of a secret experiment. A few insisted he had erased himself on purpose. Each theory sounded extreme, yet none felt impossible anymore. Then, late one evening, the police received a phone call that changed the direction of the case. The woman's voice was calm but tense. She said she had seen the news and recognized the man immediately. She claimed his name was Daniel Reed. She said she knew him years ago, that he had disappeared suddenly, and that seeing his face again had shaken her deeply. She refused to say how she knew him over the phone and insisted on meeting in person. Detectives traced the call. It came from a public phone. They arranged a meeting at a quiet cafe near the station. Officers arrived early and took seats at different tables, pretending to be customers. The minutes passed slowly. Every time the door opened, Harris looked up. Finally, a woman entered, wearing a dark coat and a scarf pulled high around her neck. She scanned the room, hesitated, then sat down. Before detectives could approach her, she stood up again. She left without saying a word. By the time officers reached the door, she was gone. The name Daniel Reed sent shockwaves through the department. Records showed that a man by that name had died in a car accident 10 years earlier. The case was closed, death confirmed, body identified, family notified. Yet the woman had spoken with certainty, not confusion or doubt. When detectives reviewed the old case file, something didn't feel right. The accident report was brief. The photos were limited. The identification relied heavily on documents found in the car, documents that could be planted. No fingerprints were taken at the time. No dental confirmation. The idea that Daniel Reed had died once already, and possibly died again under a different name, was terrifying. At the same time, facial recognition experts were brought in. They ran the John Doe's face through advanced systems, including international databases. Again, nothing. But one analyst noticed something strange. Sight and features of the face appeared subtly altered. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to suggest minor surgical changes. A nose reshaped slightly. A jawline adjusted. Nothing dramatic, but intentional. This was not just a man without an identity. This was a man who had been rebuilt. As the days passed, the case began to affect the detectives personally. Harris found himself studying the photos late at night, searching the eyes for answers. Who looks directly at death with such calm? Who lives without attachments, without records, without a name? The pressure increased from above. Supervisors asked for progress. Politicians asked for silence. A few officials suggested the case might be better left unsolved, quietly filed away as an unfortunate mystery. Harris refused. Something about the man's empty life felt like an insult, as if someone had decided he did not deserve to be remembered. Then another strange detail surfaced. A forensic accountant reviewing regional missing persons reports noticed a pattern. Over the last 15 years, several individuals had vanished completely. No bodies. No bank activity. No sightings. The cases were unrelated on paper, scattered across different states, different backgrounds. But they all shared one thing. Every disappearance occurred shortly after the person became involved in a legal case, investigation, or political scandal. It was too much to ignore. The man with no identity might not have been forgotten. He might have been designed that way. And if that was true, then his death was not just the end of a life. It was the collapse of something carefully built over years. Someone had decided he was no longer useful. Or worse, that he had become dangerous. By the end of the second chapter of the investigation, one truth had become clear. The police were no longer searching for a name. They were searching for a secret someone had killed to protect. The first real breakthrough did not come from a detective, a witness, or a confession. It came from someone most people at the station barely noticed. Ethan Cole was a young data analyst assigned to review overlooked evidence, the kind of work that rarely led to headlines. He spent his days rewatching footage, rechecking reports, and questioning details others assumed were meaningless. While the senior detectives chased theories about secret identities and erased records, Ethan focused on something simpler. The man's clothes. At first glance, there was nothing special about them. A dark coat, a plain shirt, fitted trousers. But the more Ethan studied the photos and physical evidence, the more uncomfortable he felt. The fabric quality was high, but not flashy. The stitching was flawless, precise, and consistent across every seam. This was not mass-produced clothing. It was custom-made. Ethan contacted a textile expert who confirmed his suspicion. The stitching style was rare, used by only a small number of private tailors. These tailors didn't advertise. They served a specific type of client, people who valued privacy above all else. Politicians, executives, and individuals who paid extra to leave no record. Detective Harris was skeptical but allowed Ethan to follow the lead. Over the next few days, they visited several tailors. Most shook their heads. Some refused to speak. Then, in a quiet shop tucked between closed businesses, an older tailor studied the fabric closely and sighed. "I know this work," he said softly. He didn't know the man's real name. He had never asked. The client paid in cash and gave only one name. Mr. Gray. He came in every few months, always alone, always calm. He ordered the same simple designs and never changed his measurements. The tailor remembered one detail clearly. Mr. Gray never removed his coat inside the shop, no matter how warm it was. When Harris asked why that stood out, the tailor hesitated. Then he admitted that once, by accident, he saw a thin scar near the man's side when the coat shifted. The memory sent a chill through Harris. It matched the surgical scar from the autopsy. The tailor provided security footage from inside the shop. The video showed the man clearly. He walked with confidence, his posture controlled, his eyes always scanning. But what caught Ethan's attention was something outside the shop. On 2 different days, different people were visible across the street, standing still, watching. They were not together. They did not speak. But their presence was unmistakable. Mr. Gray was being followed. The team expanded their search. They reviewed traffic cameras, store security footage, and transit recordings from areas near the tailor shop. Slowly, a pattern emerged. The man moved through the city like a shadow, never staying in one place for long. Coffee shops, libraries, public transport. He avoided routines, never used the same route twice in a row. But he was not hiding. It was more accurate to say he was careful. Then came the most disturbing discovery. During a final examination of the man's shoes, a technician noticed uneven weight in one sole. When the sole was carefully cut open, they found a small object wrapped in plastic. A flash drive. The room went silent. The drive was encrypted, protected by layers of security. It took days to access it. When they finally succeeded, the screen filled with files. Names, dates, locations. Each file was detailed, precise, and emotionless. Many names were unfamiliar. Others were not. Some belonged to people who had died under suspicious circumstances. Accidents, sudden illnesses, unsolved cases from years ago. People connected to financial scandals, corruption trials, and major investigations. The realization settled slowly but heavily. The man with no identity was connected to all of them. One file included photographs taken from a distance. Another contained travel logs across cities and countries. Hotel rooms paid in cash. Meetings documented down to the minute. This was not the work of an amateur. It was systematic, disciplined, and cold. Harris felt his stomach tighten. The victim was no victim at all. He had been an operator. As detectives read deeper, they noticed something else. The file stopped abruptly 3 weeks before his death. The final entries were incomplete. Locations without names. Notes cut short mid-sentence. It was as if the man had been interrupted, or had changed his mind. Ethan discovered a hidden folder inside the drive, locked behind an even stronger encryption layer. When it finally opened, there was only one file, an audio recording. The man's voice was calm, steady, and tired. "I don't have a name anymore," he said. "That was the price. If you're hearing this, it means I failed. Or I chose not to finish." The room froze. In the recording, the man explained that he worked for a group that didn't exist on paper. They called themselves nothing. They erased problems. People who threatened powerful systems. He didn't describe himself as a killer, but he didn't deny it either. He said he believed he was preventing chaos. Until recently. I saw the consequences, the voice continued. Innocent people destroyed. Truth buried. I can't pretend anymore. The recording ended abruptly. No confession. No apology. Just a man standing at the edge of his own creation. The revelation shook the entire investigation. The man had lived as a ghost by choice, his identity removed not as punishment, but as protection. He was valuable because he could not be traced. And now, someone had decided he was no longer safe to keep alive. As detectives connected the dots, another unsettling pattern emerged. Many of the people listed on the drive had been declared dead, but their deaths were never properly examined. Files closed quickly. Evidence missing. Witnesses changing statements. It was a system protecting itself. The pressure returned, stronger this time. Higher authorities requested access to the drive. Meetings were called behind closed doors. Harris was warned, subtly, to slow down. The message was clear. This case had crossed an invisible line. But Harris couldn't stop. He returned again and again to the recording. The man's voice wasn't afraid. It wasn't angry. It was exhausted. The voice of someone who had lived too long without being seen. Then Ethan uncovered one final detail. In the last week of the man's life, surveillance footage showed him doing something different. He stood still. He waited. In one clip, he looked directly at a camera, something he had never done before. In another, he sat on a park bench for over an hour, doing nothing. He was no longer running. He was preparing. Chapter 3 ended with a chilling realization. The man found without identity had not been erased by accident. He had lived as a weapon, hidden in plain sight. And when he decided to stop being useful, the people who created him made sure he disappeared completely. Not just from life, from history. By the time the investigation reached its fourth stage, the mood inside the department had changed completely. What began as a search for a name had turned into something far more dangerous. Detective Harris could feel it in the way conversations stopped when he entered a room, in the way phones went quiet when certain names were mentioned. The case was no longer just unsolved. It was unwanted. The flash drive was now kept in a locked evidence cabinet, guarded more carefully than any murder weapon Harris had ever seen. Only a handful of people had access, and even then, every minute spent reviewing its contents had to be justified. Officially, this was to protect the integrity of the investigation. Unofficially, it was to control how much truth was allowed to surface. Harris spent long nights alone in his office, replaying the audio recording again and again. The man's voice stayed calm throughout, but there was something beneath it, something human and fragile. This was not the voice of a monster bragging about his work. It was the voice of someone who had realized too late what he had become. As analysts dug deeper into the files, a clearer picture began to form. The group the man described had no single leader. It operated through layers of distance and silence. Orders came indirectly. Payments were routed through charities, shell companies, and foreign accounts. No one at the top ever touched the ground. People like Mr. Gray did that for them. The man's role had been simple in theory. Identify threats. Remove them quietly. Make sure nothing pointed back to the source. He traveled alone, never stayed long, never left evidence behind. His lack of identity was his greatest asset. If caught, there would be nothing to trace. But something had changed. The final weeks of his life told a different story. Records from traffic cameras, hotel logs, and public transport showed him slowing down. He lingered in places where he had once passed through quickly. He stopped masking his face in crowds. It was subtle, but intentional. He wanted to be seen. Then came the discovery that tied everything together. In one of the encrypted folders, analysts found a partial list labeled only with dates. These were not names of targets. They were meetings. Locations where Mr. Gray had met with handlers. When detectives cross-checked those dates with public records, a disturbing pattern emerged. Each meeting occurred shortly before a major event. A corporate scandal buried. A court case dismissed. A witness suddenly recanting testimony. Mr. Gray was not acting alone. He was a tool used at critical moments to protect powerful interests. The most shocking revelation came from a file that almost went unnoticed. It contained only a single image. A photograph of a young woman standing outside a courthouse, holding a folder tightly against her chest. She looked nervous but determined. Behind her, barely visible in the reflection of a window, was Mr. Gray. The date on the photo was marked 3 weeks before his death. Detectives searched records connected to the woman. Her name was Laura Bennett. She was an investigative accountant who had been working on a case involving financial crimes tied to a major corporation. The case had collapsed suddenly after key evidence disappeared. Laura had resigned shortly afterward and vanished from public view. At first, it seemed obvious. She had been a target. But the file told a different story. Notes attached to the image described surveillance, not preparation. Mr. Gray was watching her, not to eliminate her, but to protect her. This changed everything. Harris felt the weight of the realization settle heavily on his chest. Mr. Gray had turned against his own system. Instead of silencing a threat, he had chosen to guard it. That decision alone would have sealed his fate. The audio recording began to make sense. When Mr. Gray spoke of seeing the consequences, this was what he meant. Innocent people destroyed not because they were criminals, but because they stood too close to the truth. Further investigation revealed that Laura Bennett had gone underground using a new identity. Someone had helped her. Someone with resources, knowledge, and access to hidden networks. Someone like Mr. Gray. The theory grew stronger as more evidence surfaced. In the final days before his death, Mr. Gray had accessed secure locations not listed in his previous files. He had met with unknown contacts. He had withdrawn large sums of cash. Not for himself, but for someone else. He was planning an escape. Not his own. The poison that killed him was traced again, this time with greater urgency. The laboratory that produced it had initially denied any breach. But under pressure, a quiet audit revealed a missing vial. No official report was filed. No internal investigation followed. The loss was simply absorbed. That silence spoke louder than any confession. Harris requested permission to bring the findings to a federal oversight committee. The request was denied without explanation. Shortly afterward, he was called into a private meeting with his superior. The message was polite but firm. The department was being advised to close the case. There was concern about national security. Continuing could cause unnecessary complications. Harris understood the meaning behind the words. This case was touching something too large to fight openly. But he also knew that closing it would mean accepting that Mr. Gray's final act meant nothing. Late one night, Harris returned to the recording one last time. He listened closely, focusing on details he had missed before. At the very end, just before the audio cut off, there was a faint sound. A pause. Then a whisper. She needs time. That was all. No name. No location. Just that single sentence. Mr. Gray had known his end was coming. He had not tried to run. He had not tried to disappear again. Instead, he had allowed himself to be found. His body placed carefully near the tracks. Clean, calm, anonymous. It was not an accident. It was insurance. By dying without an identity, he ensured that the investigation would begin. That questions would be asked. That someone, somewhere, might follow the trail long enough to protect the person he had saved. The truth behind the body was now painfully clear. Mr. Gray had lived as a ghost to serve a system that thrived on secrecy. But in the end, he used that same invisibility to break it, even if only slightly. His death was not just a silencing. It was a warning. A warning that even the most carefully erased lives can leave echoes. And those echoes, once heard, can never be completely buried. The official end of the case came quietly, without headlines or announcements. One morning, Detective Harris arrived at the station to find a thin folder waiting on his desk. Inside was a short report stamped with final approval. The investigation into John Doe 47 was closed due to lack of actionable leads. No suspects. No further action recommended. It felt unreal. After months of late nights, hidden files, and dangerous truths, the story ended not with justice, but with silence. Harris read the report twice, hoping he had missed something. He hadn't. Every important detail was gone. References to the flash drive were removed. Mentions of the ray poison were softened into vague language. Mr. Gray was reduced once again to an unidentified man found dead near railway tracks. The flash drive disappeared the same day. No explanation was given. Evidence logs showed it had been transferred for higher review. Harris knew better than to ask where it went or who now controlled it. Some questions only brought trouble. Within a week, 2 officers who had worked closely on the case were reassigned. Ethan Cole was moved to a different department, far from data analysis. Harris himself was advised to take time off. The suggestion sounded friendly, but the meaning was clear. Stop digging. The body of the man with no identity was buried in a small cemetery on the edge of the city. No name was carved into the stone, just a number. No family attended. No ceremony was held. The grave blended into the ground like it had always been there. Yet Harris could not forget. He visited the grave once, standing alone in the cold air. He thought about the life that had been erased so completely that even death could not restore it. Mr. Gray had lived without a past and died without a name. And still, somehow, he had managed to make a choice that mattered. The question that remained haunted Harris more than any other. Did it work? For weeks, nothing happened. No arrests. No leaks. No sudden news stories exposing powerful crimes. It seemed as if the system had swallowed the threat whole, just as it always had. The world moved on. Then, quietly, something shifted. A major corporation announced it was under federal investigation for financial misconduct. The case came out of nowhere, surprising even seasoned analysts. The evidence was strong, detailed, and impossible to ignore. Several executives resigned within days. Harris noticed the name of the lead investigator on the case. Laura Bennett. She appeared on the news briefly, her face calm, her voice steady. She did not speak about how she had gathered the evidence or where she had been for the past year. She did not mention threats or fear. She simply said the truth had taken time to surface, but it was finally ready. Harris sat in his living room, staring at the screen, his heart pounding. Mr. Gray had succeeded. But the victory came at a cost. As more investigations followed, a pattern emerged. Smaller cases reopened. Old witnesses came forward. Files once sealed were quietly reviewed again. Nothing dramatic happened all at once. There were no public accusations of secret groups or shadow systems. Instead, the change was slow, careful, and almost invisible. Just like Mr. Gray had been. Harris understood now why the body had been placed where it was. Why it had been left clean and calm. Why there had been no attempt to hide it. Mr. Gray had wanted attention, but not for himself. He had wanted curiosity. He had wanted someone to ask why a man with no identity had died so carefully. That question had led them to Laura Bennett. And Laura Bennett had carried the truth the rest of the way. Still, there was no justice for the man himself. No court would ever speak his real name. No record would ever list his true actions, good or bad. Officially, he remained a mystery. A footnote. A cold case. But Harris knew the truth was more complicated. Mr. Gray had been both a villain and a protector. He had destroyed lives and saved one. He had served a system and then betrayed it. He had lived without morality and died because he found it too late. In the months that followed, Harris noticed subtle changes in his own behavior. He stopped believing every report. He read between lines. He questioned silence as much as noise. The case had changed him. It had taught him that some crimes were not meant to be solved publicly, and some heroes would never be named. One evening, long after the case files were boxed away, Harris received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No explanation. No signature. It contained a sentence. He bought me time. I won't waste it. Harris folded the paper slowly. He did not need to ask who it was from. The man with no identity had done what he could. He had stepped out of the shadows for just long enough to make a difference. The world would never thank him. The law would never recognize him. But somewhere, a truth had survived because of his silence. And perhaps that was the only justice he was ever meant to have. The story of the body found with no identity would eventually fade from public memory. New cases would replace it. New mysteries would take its place. But beneath the surface, Hidden from headlines and history books, the impact remained. A nameless man had reminded the world that even those erased from existence could still leave a mark. And sometimes, the most powerful act is not being remembered. It is making sure the truth lives on without you.